Todd Achilles, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good, Matt. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Kind of a sad day, though. Kind of a sad day.
Yeah, that incident in Coeur d'Alene, just unbelievable. I mean, how could something like that happen?
You know what it goes to show? There are terrible people everywhere. And I think I had Bree Derrick on recently, who's the director of Idaho Department of Corrections. And I tend to believe that it's like, oh, well, like everybody, deep down is good. And I have heard time and time again from people in corrections and law enforcement, like, listen, man, there will always be a certain portion of the population that makes us need prisons. And it's quite sad.
No, it is. And firefighters, right? I mean, they're the guys that go towards danger. That's how they're wired. For someone to attack firefighters, it's bordering on incomprehensible, right? How could someone think that they would want to do that? Yeah, it's incredibly sad. I don't want to speculate on, this dude's motivation. Wait for the facts, but just it's sad. It's sad for everybody, for the families, for the community. Awful stuff.
And especially considering what firefighters are going through in general in the state. I mean, the beautiful thing about the United States and the beautiful thing about Idaho is we get, to vote on things we want as community members. And some communities want more social services and some want less. And okay, great. And I prefer to live in communities that have more social services, and my preferences do not have to be other people's preferences. But there are a lot of communities in Idaho who have firefighters that genuinely are like, listen, man, we can't get our trucks fixed. We can't, there are real problems. There was also that union busting bill that was coming out last year.
Yeah,
that went
in my committee. Yeah.
Yeah. And it didn't pass, right? Like that didn't.
It got a print reading, but it died in the actual committee where it was sent. So
gotcha. So it got an RS, but it didn't.
Exactly.
But then the committee shot it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just stuff like that. It's like, man, could we kick people when they're down anymore?
Yeah. No, it's sad stuff.
Yeah. More sad stuff. You're going deeper into politics.
Nice.
Talk to me.
Nice.
Talk to me, man.
Yeah. So I am announcing today that I'm running for the U.S. Senate as an independent. So I've resigned from the Democratic Party. I've resigned from the legislature, and running for the U.S. Senate for a couple of reasons. One is I just we need better representation in Washington, D.C., because we've kind of created a system, an economy here that's just completely imbalanced. More and more, we're favoring corporations over families. Idahoans just barely can afford to even live in Idaho. And I'm leaving the Democratic Party and becoming an independent because, honestly, we're stuck in this doom loop between the two parties. They're both in favor of selling off public lands. They're both increasing the debt. They've both engaged in endless wars. You just go down the list. And the kids of both presidents are making a ton of money off the person that's living, their dad living in the White House. So all of these things collectively just point to a party system that's kind of lost its way. And I think both of them have. And the path forward is, to take this independent route and really break through that gridlock and bring some sanity back to what's going on in Washington, D.C. and, sort of reaffirm our commitment to the Constitution rather than, these party ideologies that just get more and more extreme every year.
When you're talking about parties, and again, I didn't come from a political background. So what I've learned over the last 3 years is all like, wow, I had no idea. And the partisan nature of or hyper-partisan nature of these parties and people in general is so shocking to me because let me give you a really, really, really bad analogy. But I heard a long time ago when I started my jiu-jitsu career, somebody's like, look, jiu-jitsu's easy. You take stuff that works and you throw out everything else. And that's what you're left with. And I was like, that's interesting. They're like, so are you going to get like a one punch knockout all the time? It's like, no, they're like, yeah. And punching is, there are a lot of risks involved. You have to be at the right distance, all these things, blah, 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 if you're engaging in a fight, right? And this is like pre-monster UFC. So like now I know there are a lot of good. But the point is they were like, listen, the things that come from classic martial arts, they just in general don't work that well in practice. So like we focus on that stuff. it does not appear to me that that is too dissimilar from what's going on in politics. It's like you have Republicans and they're Republicans and they believe in a very specific position. And that party, by the way, can change, right? And if the party changes collectively, you change. It's not that the thing that works changes, right? I was chatting with you briefly just right before we started. All the clips of Hillary Clinton from years ago or Obama from years ago talking about making illegal immigrants into U.S. citizens, right? And saying like, they got to have to pay a fine. If they've been here, they got to like come out of the shadows. They got to do these things. They got to learn they got to learn English, all these. It's like, if somebody said that now, they're like, oh, you're a MAGA crazy, right? But here, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were both saying it decades ago. And it's like, okay, so you could say it then, but then the party changed. And so the things they got to say changed. Yeah. All to wrap back to, the parties are not concerned with like the idea. The parties are concerned with winning elections, raising money and winning elections.
Raising money and winning elections. So, and we've got, and this I think ties in with the state of the economy too, that we have more and more mergers and acquisitions over the last 2 decades. So there's actually very little competition left in the U.S. economy in a lot of areas. So now you've got more concentrated corporate power. That means they can write bigger checks. They have more influence in what happens in Washington, D.C. And it just creates this spiral where, you got to chase the money. So you got to execute their policies, but you got to chase more money. And it just gets worse and worse. And I think the root on this is you look at what's happened with the parties and where they've gone. And they're both culpable for the state of where we are today. And listen, man, I'm scared as hell of where the country is right now. We're getting our ass kicked by China, in terms of building ships and productive output and everything else. And we shouldn't be. We have the most productive economy in the world, right? Americans kick ass. We do great stuff. But we've wrapped ourselves into so much dysfunction internally that we're just not making the decisions that we need to do. We can't grow the debt. Like, this is not hard. And there's two ways to solve the debt. You cut expenses and you increase revenues. I mean, we've got a tax policy that's just Swiss cheese in terms of carve-outs. And your average Fortune 500 company is paying about 2% tax rate. Dude, I pay a hell of a lot more than 2% tax rate. So where's the justification in that? I mean, companies were paying like 50% tax rate back in the 60s. So they're not contributing to what they need to do. And there's just a fundamental responsibility, particularly in the private sector where I spent most of my career. And I worked for 2 Fortune 50 companies, Hewlett-Packard and T-Mobile. You've got a duty to your employees, you've got a duty to your community, and you've got a duty to the country. And we've lost that. And we've created a system, frankly, that penalizes people for being poor and provides little to no opportunity for them to get out of that hole and to reestablish themselves. And it's just flat out broken. And the parties aren't doing what they need to do to fix it.
I'm a younger person than you are. I have not seen as much as you. And this is not like a silly joke or an insult. Like, I really struggle understanding this because I come from a background where it's like my dad was first generation Mexican American, born in Arizona, one of 6 kids, family implodes. He's got nothing. He goes to Vietnam, flies helicopters, uses the GI Bill, comes back, has to do like 4 or 5 years in junior college because he barely graduated high school. Then goes to, college, becomes a doctor. My uncle, same story, except he ends up going to Harvard Law School, like all of these things. And they came from nothing. Now, I am not that hard. I wish I'm not that metal, man.
I don't know, man. You're pretty good.
I wonder how I came from that stock. But for me, I grew up in I went to one of the worst high schools in California. And like crawled out of it, just like barely, and made it into what I consider a good university. I don't care for Berkeley at the city at all, but the education was quality. Yeah. And it's like, okay, I made these things happen, but help me understand what it looks like for a country that gives more opportunity to people who are down and out, because it seems that we do have social programs. Maybe we need more. I have no idea, but I've been told that just like 50% of the U.S. population is drawing on social services and stuff. I don't know if that's accurate, but
it might be, but I think I think that's a really important point because that is the problem. There are too many people drawing on the social safety net, and here's how I get to the problem with that is about a year ago I was doing some work with the Medicaid office for Idaho, and the Medicaid expansion population is about 80,000 folks, and they're in that gap where they're making too much money to be eligible for Medicaid, but not enough to be able to afford plans on the health exchange. And we've got a great health exchange in the state. So they're kind of
yourhealthidaho.com, by the way. Go there, check it out.
Yeah, it's one of the best in the country. These guys do a good job. So, but you've got this population, 80,000 people plus or minus that are stuck in the middle. So they're working. So I said, all right, well, do me a favor, Medicaid office. Who are they working for? And there's no field that the people have to fill in, and there's no like drop down. But they basically they spent a month going through the data, and they came up with a list. Guess who's the top of the list?
For the 80,000 that are on Medicaid.
For the 80,000 that are in the Medicaid expansion program.
I mean, I would imagine like kind of like a low-end and mega employer like Walmart or fast food restaurants. What is it?
You're going down the right path. Walmart's top of the list. You've got Amazon. You've got Consumer Direct. You've got Taco Bell. You've got Burger King. You've got Jackson's, Maverick. All of these low-wage employers. And when you dig into it another layer, so you keep pulling back the layers on this thing to find out what's going on, a lot of these people are part-time. Okay, so if they're part-time, the employer is not obligated by federal law to provide health care for them. So what's going on? You see more and more that these big employers are manipulating full-time, part-time mix so that they're pushed, so they don't have the additional benefits cost for these workers.
So essentially say I'm Walmart and I want to game the system, right? And I don't know how they do it. But let's say I'm like, all right, I can hire Todd 40 hours a week, but I'm going to have to pay him healthcare. Or I hire Todd for 20 and Matt for 20. I don't have to pay them anything. I help them learn how to apply for Medicaid, right? Or whatever social services, which is, I actually read that McDonald's and a couple other employers years ago would go through this process where they'd hire people and then they teach them how to apply for government services. And this was that was the nucleus of corporate welfare, where they're like, look, we have people that are working for these corporations. The corporations know the threshold after which they have to provide them these additional things. So they walk right up to that 100%. Threshold. They don't cover it. And then we, the taxpayers, we subsidize those people because they need to have some manner of, either be it food assistance or medical care assistance. Yeah. And we pay for it. And Walmart doesn't have to pay for it. So they have like an army of 20-hour-a-week, Todd and Matts that just,
that's 100%.
And that's where you get people working 2 or 3 jobs because they can't get full-time employment because all the employers that they are capable of applying for in that moment aren't interested in paying any of their services.
And then they're stuck, right? So they're never going to cross that threshold to be able to get an employer-sponsored plan. And listen, I mean, you can have all this conversation about the Canadian system or the British system or something. We should have a single-payer system. Listen, we made a bet in this country that it was the employer's responsibility to take care of their employees, right? And that, it is what it is. And that's the system we have. So when the employers don't do that, that's bullshit, right? And we should not be subsidizing these corporations. Walmart, if you look at the number of stores and the average metrics, revenue metrics per store, they probably do about $3 billion of revenue in Idaho. And they take out, probably call it about a $250 million of profit from the state. And we're paying the benefits for their part-time employees. It's just wrong, man. But it's legal, right? That's part of federal law. And so they get away with that, and they manage their business, and it drives who knows another little incremental point or two of profit. And again, I'm the biggest capitalist in the room. I run billion-dollar operations. Businesses should be driving towards profit, increasing efficiency, innovating, doing all these things. That's why we rely on the capitalist system. 86% of Americans work for private companies, but they've got to be some bounds on this stuff, right? They can't just, basically abuse Idahoans as part-time workers, and then we have to pick up the tab, or the federal government has to pick up the tab.
And then people are complaining that these people are on
social
assistance.
Yeah, and they're saying, look, the Medicaid population is off the chart. Look how fast it's growing. Yeah, you're right. It is growing too fast because these companies aren't doing their duty.
So how do we address this type of thing without going to war with corporate America? right? Because again, I'm with you. Like I believe in to a point. I believe in free markets, right? I don't want 5-year-olds working in the fields or anything. Like that's not good. But like to a point, I believe in free markets. But I also, it does seem clear to me that if left to its own devices, the capitalist system will not carve out any kind of responsibility to the host country that it's engaging in, right? Like that's just not what it's made for.
Yeah, it's a race to the bottom. Right, the old expression, capitalism brings out the best in products and the worst in people. I think the other thing that really concerns me, and I just hear this again and again when I'm knocking doors in my district, that folks' wages aren't changing. And in Idaho, we got a decent bump during the pandemic of sort of median wages, but we're still lagging way behind. You've got a minimum wage of $7.25. My bill tried to propose raising that to $15 an hour, but $25 an hour is a livable wage in Ada County. Canyon County is about 50. Butte County, by the way, is the same as Ada County in terms of cost of living. So it's rural counties are not cheap places to live in. So you've got all this downward pressure on wages, and there was a fantastic study that Rand did. Ran the think tank in Southern California that is famous in the 60s and the 70s. Very data driven on how unequal is the American economy, and so you basically got this line of the country's been growing like this. Again, we're kicking everybody's butt, but wages, particularly for sort of the 80% and below, has been basically flat since the 80s. So this is 80%. Sure. Basically workers, non-supervisor, non-manager. So you've got this big gap that starts in the 80s. And when you look out here in 2025, I mean, that gap, the area between the two lines is huge. And so Rand did a study to try and calculate how much that is. And basically, if you're, the short version on this thing is, if you're in the 25th percentile, you're making, roughly $40,000 a year in Idaho. If we had stayed equal, productivity and wages had stayed equal since the 1980s, you'd have basically an extra $30,000 in your paycheck.
That's where you had people working for like GM that had money to have a single parent household, right? They had money to go on summer trips. They had money to buy a car, right? Or maintain their vehicles, right? Because I missed the golden age of America completely. I was born in 82. Okay, so I was born into stagflation and then like hyper, inflation, corporate takeovers.
You didn't live through the 70s, Matt. That was hell.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
you guys had really trash cars in the 70s, but they didn't make up for them in the 80s. Like the birth of the station wagon in the 80s with like the wood panels and stuff. And then the 90s, like there was a period of time when I remember I was a paper boy. So I'd see the headlines, and it's like there was a period of time in the late 90s when everything was like booming, and then I was like all over, right? Yeah. Do you hit the .com bust? Then you had 9/11. I graduate from college and I'm humming along. It's like I just have a couple years out in the adult world, and 2008 hits and everything goes to hell. It's like I didn't live through this. Hey, the average person is doing all right. In fact, I didn't grow up with money. I was really anxious about that when I was graduating college. I didn't want to be poor, right? And I didn't know how to fix it. And so I was really worried. I was like, I need to educate myself as much as possible. I wasn't getting education from my parents. I was like, right. So I go to Barnes & Noble and I buy like, 2 feet worth of books. One of them, amazingly, was Why We Want You to Be Rich by Robert Kiyosaki and Donald Trump. Okay, so this book was written in like 2004, 2005. It was essentially like a throwaway just to get their faces on and sell it. But they talked in that book about the hourglass shape economy and how we used to be shaped like a pear with like this really broad middle class. Yeah. And now the middle class is shrinking, and it was becoming you're either at the top or at the bottom, but there were very few people in the middle. And in fact, they made it very clear it's not even an hourglass because there are very few people at the top. So it's like the middle class is shrinking, and it's essentially becoming this tiny hyper-focused pin on top, and then this gigantic lower class. Yeah. People have known this forever. And it's like, it doesn't appear that anybody, every time the market resets, every time in my adult life that we've had turmoil, I have, after the fact, learned that people got way richer. The rich people got way richer, right? There was a guy.
Still seeing it.
We're still seeing it. I had a real estate kind of mentor in 2000, 2008, 2009, 2010. He was telling me about a gentleman in Oakland who was purchasing houses directly from the bank in foreclosures, 100% financing. He was purchasing something like 100 a month, and he was getting them for like $100,000. He's like, these are good middle-class neighborhoods. The houses are fine. He's gobbling them up. And when the market turned, those houses went from $100,000 to $500 overnight. And he had done 100% financing, and all of the people that had put their life savings in, and some didn't, right? That was part of the problem. They were doing 100% financing, but people had equity, lost it all, had to foreclose, and then we're renting from the guy who just sucked it up from the bank. And it's like every single time it turns over, you realize the middle class got smaller and smaller and smaller.
Mm-hmm.
So help me understand this then. Let's look at Idaho, right? Because this is where my reference point is. What is something that you move into the U.S. Senate? What is something that you could look at Idaho and be like, hey, Idaho, this one thing is something I'm going to fight for because this is the thing that you're fighting. I mean, we have a wild housing market here. It's like the second least affordable housing market in the entire country, driven by people like me, right? Like I am absolutely part of the problem. I recognize that.
Well, I would. So let me get back to the core question: is what do you do? And I think one of the biggest issues is an economy. Is a capitalist system in which there's very weak or little competition in a bunch of the sectors. So let's talk about housing.
Great.
Until I resigned from the legislature, I sat on this interim housing committee, and we were having really good conversations about why it's such a problem here. So, and I introduced a bill last session for folks living in apartments that there's, and there's cases all over the country of property managers using data and algorithms in sort of a single point to basically price fix. And some of the biggest property managers in the Treasure Valley, Graystar, Avenue 5, and a couple of others have been alleged to be part of this price fixing conspiracy. But what they're doing is basically they're controlling competition. So they're sharing information on vacancy, and they're sharing information on rates. They're not talking to each other, but they're talking to this service in the middle called RealPage. So
this is something that is alleged to be happening currently.
Yes.
So it's like you and I are gigantic property managers. I'm not going to tell you directly, but I'm going to tell this guy.
Yes.
And this guy is going to compile all the data and let you know. He's like, hey, if you want to play ball, don't say 1,000, say 1,200.
Exactly.
Because other people are saying 1,200. And if you fight for this, right, like if you fight the market, everybody loses. So just say 1,200, Todd.
And so that's exactly it, Matt. But then they add to that, oh, by the way, leave some of those units vacant. Keep supply tight, because that gives the property managers more pricing power. So not only are they raising prices, they're pulling units off the market. And that's the very definition of market power, and that's why rents just go through the roof here. So that's rental housing. So if we talk about single family, you've got some interesting things, basically similar, where you've got huge developers coming in, national developers coming in. They buy, I don't know, a couple hundred acres. They get approval for 4,000 homes.
Great.
But then they build them really slowly. So they intentionally keep supply of single family homes tight. So with the people coming in, guess what? Prices go through the roof. And rather than build them and drop as many units as you can into the market. And the second problem with that is when you get all of this land in a community and you have this master plan and you're not building homes at a rate fast enough to keep up, guess what? No other builder can go in there. So you just locked up effectively most of the land in the community to build homes. So maybe there's a smaller Idaho-based builder who wants to build 20 homes. Where are they going to do it? So this is all, these are all these tools that I think these great big national providers are using to suppress competition, and guess who pays the price? You pay the price for your home. I pay the price. Somebody trying to move in, somebody trying to get, that just graduated from Boise State that's trying to get their first place, can't do it.
So let me ask you this then. And again, I I totally agree with what you just said, which is, look, the prices for wide swaths of the population are, if you're like 43, you got a good job, you've been saving, yeah, you can probably snag a house, right? If you're not 43, good job, been working, saving, it's going to be really hard, right?
But so yes, but that 43-year-old, the path just got a hell of a lot harder because they're living in an apartment where rates are being inflated way above the market. So now their savings are basically being chipped away when they should be living in an apartment for 5 or 10 years to save money for that down payment to buy a house. But you can't, right?
Okay, so but when we're looking at this, what is it? You can't get a builder to operate against the builder's best interest, right? You can't. So you're like, hey man, you're only building 80 homes. The development we're in right now, they build about 80 homes per year, and it's going to take about 10, 15 years to do the whole build out. Okay. Yeah, they could probably build way more really, really fast and devalue the product they're trying to sell to people. And yeah, it would be better for the consumer, but bad for the builder, right? So like, what's the incentivization structure, or what's the mechanism where we say, hey, here we go. Like, this is actually going to work because we're going to oversaturate so we keep prices lower, and somehow that's going to work out for you, builder.
So let's take that same community. Instead of having, one big gigantic builder that's doing most of it, chop this thing up, get some competition. You may have a regional builder like, you know what? I'm going to crank out 20 units. The price is going to be down here. I'm going to turn them fast so I don't have all those carrying costs and everything else. That's a better business model for me. As opposed to somebody that's come in from out of state, has all of the cash and the balance sheet to be able to buy up this huge project and then just do a little bit at a time, right? Because I don't want to oversaturate the market because I want to maximize my profits. And I think, Matt, this is the one of the fundamental problems when you look at all parts of the economy, whether it's healthcare, pharmaceuticals, housing. I mean, there's so much stuff, even grocery stores now, right? There's so little competition. There's been so much consolidation that the consumer's getting screwed. And then you add on top of this what's going on in the digital economy, right? And all of this stuff with, I talked about the using non-public data to set rental prices, all of the surveillance pricing that's going on. So, you and I go to Amazon, we're going to see different prices for some good, right? Because the Amazon algorithm, and this is happening across the economy, but when it's this one-to-one relationship, I'm not looking at the same price card you are. And they know they've got all the data on where I've been on the internet, where I've traveled to, what I've purchased, goods in the grocery store and everything else. So you've got this cumulative data set for each of us. And, you've got boys, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got girls.
Okay.
So it may be good X where I pay more than you do. It's good Y, you may pay more than I will. But all of this is factored. So now
that's a thing. I had no idea we have different prices.
This is a big problem that we're going to see a lot more of.
And this is not alleged. This is confirmed that Amazon changes prices based on individuals.
Yeah, and listen, you see this with Uber with like surge pricing, or you see grocery stores cranking. What you see more and more in stores and brick and mortar are digital price cards. Right. So you can change the price based on the weather. You can change the price based on, what's going on in the market or any kind of supply. But where it gets really dystopian is what's price, right? I mean, price used to be a function of the cost to make the good, put it in the store, the employees in the store and everything else. But now it's this infinitely variable thing that's a function of your ability to pay.
Right. What can we get? What can we get out of this individual or that individual?
Exactly. So just like, I've seen from talking to folks living in apartments in the Boise market, I mean, you're using these algorithms to push people's back to the wall. And the stories I've heard from renters are just absolutely awful. The same thing can happen without any federal rules of, in the digital economy to basically push your back to the wall in terms of your willingness to pay. And so price is no longer a reflection of the good. Price is a reflection of what your willingness to pay. And we're not looking at this at the federal level. This is like where we had all the antitrust stuff back in the 20s and we set those rules up and then we refreshed it in the 50s, we've got that same problem ahead of us going forward. We've got to get control and level the playing field so that we can't be exploited like this. And listen, and businesses are going to do this, right? Because it's profitable. And it's not a knock on business driving profit, but you've got to have some guardrails on what they do.
So inserting competition, it sounds like that's like an honest competitive system, an honest, more free market, less monopolized system would produce better results for the end consumer. That's essentially the idea, which is introduce competition within building, introduce competition within the rental market, introduce more appropriate and across the board competition with consumer goods like grocery stores and things like that. That's kind of the big deal.
Yeah, and it's across the economy. And this has been under both Republican and Democratic administrations. We've since the 1980s, we've basically rolled back all of the antitrust, allowed companies to merge. I mean, the digital economy is now out of control, just in terms of the size of the businesses. Healthcare is out of control. United Healthcare being, what everybody talks about. Right. And you just go through the economy, and we've lost that. We've lost that. What's the best way to describe it? Sort of that governing effect on capitalism, which is competition that levels the playing field between me buying something and you selling something.
Right, which is the nature of that was always the foundation of what I understood to be capitalism, right? Like you read Atlas Shrugged, right? Like that's essentially the nature of it, which is like, let's all engage in voluntary relationships that work for all of us. Mm-hmm. And let's not mess around. But again, when people start capturing those markets, then you don't have actual capitalism, enter crony capitalism and things of that nature. Yeah. You mentioned the debt, right? And that we can't keep increasing debt. There is a large, obviously with Doge and things like that, and you did that great series Bad Doge, which articulated the pain that Idaho specifically, locally, we were feeling because of some of the quick moving actions coming out of the federal government. But there are people that are saying, hey, we need to reduce fraud, waste, and abuse, and some of these programs are absurd. And then you have other people saying, hey, man, you do realize that we were giving that money to that sector of the world, not really for that particular cause, but so that we would have favor when we want to build like a port or something there. So it's the idea of soft power and protecting U.S. interests in other areas and using USAID in order to do that. Mm-hmm. And both make sense to me. It's like, oh, yeah, like I want, as a U.S. citizen, like I would love the U.S. or U.S. contractors to get favorable position in especially, developing countries for U.S. best interest. I also dislike fraud, waste, and abuse and funding ridiculous things. Totally. So like, how do we flush that out?
Listen, I think, we learned that the first move by Doge to reduce headcount was to fire all the probationary workers, right? And there were two types.
And to be clear, Doge didn't do this. Doge makes recommendations and the U.S. Congress enacts them, right? So to say Elon Musk did this
actually, Congress didn't. So that was the executive branch cutting headcount within agencies under the executive branch. So Congress is sort of sitting on the side going, some in Congress are saying, yay. Some in Congress are saying, not so good. Not
so great. But again, like Doge just made a recommendation, hey, get rid of all the probationary people. And the executive is like, okay, do it.
Yeah. And that turns out that you end up firing all the people that are the future of the agency and the people that get promoted. Because when you get promoted, you're probationary for a year. Right. So you've got the future and high potential, high quality people who you've decided to promote to a new job.
You've been here 16 years. You just got the job you've always been looking for. You've been there 6 months. All of a sudden you get fired.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was not good. But just getting back to the core thing. So fraud, waste, and abuse, absolutely. I think particularly in Idaho, the three biggest agencies are USDA, so Forest Service and all the ag-related services, Interior and the VA, and Interior is the BLM, and Bureau of Reclamation, who does the dams and everything else. So when you look at these agencies, they're actually pretty lean. I mean, the Boise VA here has been operating way understaffed for a while. So it's not like these are fat and a lot of people are hanging out. And I spend a lot of time with people in all these agencies. But yes, I mean, again, it's just like, if a business wants to increase profits and they just grow revenue, but they grow expenses at the same time, they don't create any profit. Right. Same thing from the national debt. Just flip the equation around. So, if you cut expenses and you cut revenue, the debt isn't going to change. And what we're looking at with the big bill right now, and honestly, I think Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky has just been spot on this. And these 10-year forecasts for how big the impact is, I think the senator had some really good logic. Which, listen, everybody's forecast is by definition wrong. But if you
10 years. Yeah, it's like who knows what's happening next year?
You have no idea what's gonna happen. But the root, he says, just look at it 1 year out, and everybody's numbers, even the best case numbers.
More coffee. Then.
I'm good.
Okay, good. Even 1 year out, best case numbers.
Best case numbers is you're still increasing the debt. And as part of this bill, we increased the debt ceiling by $5 trillion, which is basically, everybody realizing that it's going to get worse. And Senator Rand Paul is doing exactly the right thing, which is we cannot increase the debt. You have got to hold the line on this stuff, and we've got to have a downward path, which means cutting wasteful programs, and there are some out there. But you've also got to go back on the revenue side. And this is one of the things I talked about in those bad Doge videos. I had a bunch of calls from folks that joined the IRS in the last couple of years, right? The IRS had been super understaffed. And so a bunch of people came, started with the IRS here in the Boise office, and they were CPAs, they had their own accounting firms, they were great. And they wanted to do it for the right reasons. So one IRS analyst generates about, call it $8 to $10 of revenue on top of their salary. And if you look at
per hour.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. I mean, basically, the return on
$8 annually is not very, like, we need to get a better program.
Well, for every, let me say it better. So for every dollar you spend on an IRS analyst, they can return another $8
to the
nation.
Great. Oh, great.
Yeah. So there's a great ROI there.
It's an 8X.
Great. Yeah. And then, the analysis is 28% of unpaid taxes come from the top 1% of earners. So you've got this really wealthy portion of the country that's basically not paying their taxes, and they've got the CPAs and everybody else to sort of find the loopholes and take advantage of them. So you staff up the IRS to go after this, and you start getting this revenue that we should be getting. Guess who was the largest group of employees fired in that first wave, as recommended by DOJ?
IRS agents.
IRS, 75,000 IRS employees fired across the nation. So if we're not serious about the revenue side, then we're not going to fix the debt. We got to be serious about both. We got to eliminate wasteful programs. We got to eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse. We got to make sure, the super wealthy are paying their taxes. And we need to eliminate this Swiss cheese of corporate tax breaks, which is why my own employer, T-Mobile, they had, I think it was in 23, they paid zero freaking tax. One of the biggest mobile operators in the country, spinning off just God knows how much revenue, and they paid nothing in tax.
How much was their net profit that year?
Well, they worked it, right? So they're building out their network, they're doing a bunch of other stuff, but they paid zero in tax. Tesla paid 2%. The average was it was single digit. And it's like, man, that's a function of who's got the ear of the political parties and who's setting policy in Washington. And we got to stop this. Or we're going to bankrupt the country.
I get really, and again, I'm an idiot. Let's be very clear. I get really worried about, I don't know how to address the problem with like, hey, this company didn't pay taxes, but they also recorded zero revenue. And it's like, okay, but they recorded zero
profit.
Yes, correct. Excuse me. Zero net profit. They had, let's say, $1 billion in revenue, and they spent $1 billion and won. So they actually lost $1. And you're like, well, that doesn't make sense. They made $1 billion. It's like, no. But then they either reinvested in things. They had depreciation schedules. They had, all these different things. The people that they were paying the salaries, whatever portion of that $1 billion, those people paid taxes, right? And those people didn't, whatever it might be. But how do we address that where it's like, okay, look, what if you genuinely What if you genuinely are spending more than you're making, and you're not attempting to engage in a nonprofit? Like Microsoft was this classic example, very similar to what you're saying. They only turned a profit, I believe, 3 years in the first 28 of operation. Okay. And you don't have to confirm or deny that. Let's just say for argument's sake, I'm correct. What do? Microsoft was obviously building at a breakneck speed. They were in good faith investing and doing R&D and all of these different things. So how do we make them pay taxes on net profit that they don't actually realize?
Yeah, listen, a fast growing company, and that's a good example. And Amazon did the same thing, right? Amazon didn't return any profit forever.
Right, Tesla as well. I have a friend who did a solar company, and he had a gigantic exit, and they were turning negative and had to continue getting investors, growing at breakneck speed.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's a difference between a company that's growing fast and plowing all their money back into growth, and so they're not really realizing any profit. They're buying more plant and equipment and everything else. And a mature company that's basically kind of manipulated the tax code such that, oh, look, I can write off that $5 billion and I can write off that $2 billion. And you just kind of play this game where, oh, look, now on a net basis, I've claimed all these deductions and everything else. I don't have any tax to pay.
And you would say reduce the deductions and the things they're writing off.
Yeah. And there was a law to put a minimum on corporations, but you still have a bunch of stuff going on around that minimum corporate tax rate. Where on a net basis, they're down in single digits.
Man.
And again, I think as a country, we can't do this. The Navy is the smallest it's been in 4 decades, I think. China is outbuilding us on ships like 85-1. The Army is a hell of a lot smaller than when I was in the 90s. And the world is not getting safer. So if the great flaw in the U.S. in the 20s and the 30s, particularly in the 20s, is that we just completely underinvested in the military. We were like a second world country when it comes to the military in the 20s, and just not prepared for what happened in Europe. If we don't make these investments, it makes the world more dangerous, not less.
When you bring up China, and especially again considering the national stage that you're talking about, when you talk about China, one thing that people always bring up with China outcompeting us with is investing in their youth and their education. People roundly criticize the United States education system. Fine, I'm not here to defend it, but they roundly criticize it and say, it's based on this Prussian model, and we're essentially making factory workers and all of these things. And look at China, they're pumping out all of this great stuff. Now, mind you watch a video of kids in China, they're all hooked up to a screen with head monitors, making sure their eyes aren't like drooping, like checking brainwaves. And so it's like, listen, I would rather be a factory worker dude than like that. What do you like? That's insane to me that you're hooked up to the screen. So where's the sweet spot where we still have humanity engaged with our youth? We're not just hooking them up to screens as much as people would really like. I wholly disagree with that. And maybe I shouldn't, I don't know, educate me on it. But like, what do we do as far as our education system? I think we're really at an all-time low with faith in public education, and we need a robust education system now more than ever.
100%. I did a lot of business in China during my days in the tech sector. I competed with Chinese companies. I did partnerships with Chinese companies, and it is impressive, but it lacks, super broad statement here, right? Sure. We're talking about 1 billion people, but it lacks the creativity and the individuality that I think is the hallmark of being an American and American education.
Sure.
Do they do things better than us? Absolutely. In a rapidly changing world where, we got to figure out and be creative about how we, what the next wave is. I bet on the Idaho education system. I mean, we were 49th on a per pupil basis, roughly.
For
But
funding.
on a results basis, we're like in the top 20. I mean, the Idaho education system, we punch way above our weight. So I think that the roots are there. We have to have confidence, and we need to stop burdening public education in the state with all these sorts of rules while we're cutting checks to families who want to send their kids to private school.
You don't like the cursive requirement? Well, what are you saying? I'm not 100% sure.
I would so fail that class.
Oh my God. Yeah. And that your last statement that it's like, hey, we continue to layer on problems or additional requirements onto a system that everybody is saying this system is so broken it doesn't work. By the way, let's ask it to do one more thing.
Yeah.
And when that doesn't work sufficiently, we're like, and that's why we need to give money to these people who have none of these requirements.
Yeah.
Right.
And in an economy where the median worker, I mean, if you go back to that, my point about the American economy has done this and wages have done that, you're taking on, you have a huge swath of the population in Idaho that's just struggling to get by because they're missing that incremental $30,000 in their annual paycheck.
Sure.
Because wages have not kept up with productivity. And that's a policy thing, right? We could have increased the minimum wage. We could have required even part-time workers to be on the health plan of corporations that do $3 billion in the state of Idaho. These are all policy decisions that got us into this problem where we are now. And we've got to unwind those and close the gap, because schools are, there's kids in schools where their families are just on the edge. And that's not how we build a country.
That's not, I was just going to say, that's not good for the future, right? Like if you look at, as you just said, how to build a country, you look at who's coming next, right? Like you and I are already fixed figures in the world, right? Like maybe we get a little bit better, a little bit worse, whatever. But if you want to grow the country and grow the prosperity, you don't look to us, you look to our kids. And like, okay, what can we do to pump those kids full of as much knowledge, options, and capacity as humanly possible? Yeah. Speaking of kids, and you brought up healthcare again, what do you think about, okay, I just went on a trip. I just got back last night. I'm a little jet lagged. Coffee's helping a lot. But I was very fortunate to be gifted a trip overseas. So I was in Europe. And again, I could not have afforded it myself. And we went to Italy, which was wild because I actually got to go to Lucca, where my family's from, my mom's family. I was like, this is crazy. Like there hasn't been somebody from my bloodline here in like 100 years, but like here I am. It's a walled city, super cool.
Or you walk around saying, hey, cuz.
I was like, hey, what's the matter with you? It was like that scene from Luca. Yeah, it was ridiculous. It was the best time ever though. And again, with my 3 boys and everything. But I'm gluten-free in the United States. Okay. I don't get Costco pizza. I don't get croissants. I don't get, whatever, Jimmy John's. I don't get any of that stuff. I went over there, man. I ate all my way through Italy. It was hilarious, right? Like I was eating these giant focaccia sandwiches. I was having the pizza. I ate the pasta. It was no problem at all. And it just reminded me of all the things I've always heard. It's like, oh, you can go to Italy or you can go to another country and you can eat the food there. By the way, stuffing my face with gelato, pizza, all these things, both my wife and I lost weight. Like how? I don't even know how it's possible. We weren't working out. It's like, how did we lose weight? Like this doesn't even make sense. And again, like that's part of this problem in the United States. Our food system is so out of whack. That's one of the big things, obviously, that delivered, RFK Jr. and the Maha movement. What do you think can be done about that? Because it's like, obviously farmers are doing their best to make a living and grow crops. And is it, how the regulations on farming? Is it the regulations on food production? Is it the lack of regulations on food production that has produced this?
Yeah, part of the intent behind that algorithmic price fixing bill that I introduced last session was not only rental housing, that was the priority, but this is also creeping up in the ag industry too. Because you've got, the meatpacking sector is a great example. You've got basically 4 gigantic meat packers, and then you've got cattle ranchers and everybody else, all across the country. And so those 4 were fixing prices. They were paying less for the cows coming in, and they were increasing the prices of the packaged meat going out the other side. Now they got busted for that, But that's an example where they're, manipulating the market. Now, you can look at different parts of the ag industry and you see that. And one of the things that's really interesting is the seed industry. The seed industry has become more and more like a tech
Yes.
or software, because you've got a license, basically the sort of the core seeds, and then you've got to pay licensing fees. And there's just a few companies that make the seed. They own all the intellectual property behind the seeds. And so the people that actually grow them, and there's a ton in Canyon County, because there's so little competition upstream, their margins are really tight. They don't have a lot of choice. And so you've just got this narrowing of what's grown in the U.S. And I think that, listen, I'm no expert on this stuff, but by narrowing what's grown in the U.S., it narrows what's on the table. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, maybe in some areas it's good because, these seeds use less water and that's perfect for Idaho. Or maybe it's got some unintended consequences from a health standpoint, related to like the gluten. So there's just, there's a fundamental lack of innovation. When you lose competition, you lose innovation. And when you lose innovation, then, things get driven by what maximizes profit, not sort of what those breakthroughs are. And I think that is also contributing to some of the issues that we've got in the economy.
So ultimately, it sounds like you're saying, hey, look, we need to have better guardrails around the systems and industries in the United States to ensure that those operating those fundamental industries cannot game the system and screw the American public.
Yeah.
But we need to make sure that we instill guardrails, not because we have the right answer and we're going to have a centralized economy, but we're going to install guardrails to maintain the greatest innovation and, profit mechanism, which is, a fundamentally free market that we possibly can have.
Yeah. And we want that competition, right? Because that's what drives the innovation. That's what drives the efficiency. It's what
drives down rent costs. If you have two apartments competing for one tenant, they have to do whatever they can to get that tenant. And that produces, okay, I can go a little bit lower than this guy. I'll get the person. That's what drives, lower housing costs. It's 100%. Like you have more housing, you're competing for fewer buyers, the competition is always the thing that where the cream rises to the top.
And that's how we balance capitalism, right? And the last damn thing we want is to take those 86% of Americans who are working in the private sector and have them work for government, right? I mean, that's like we've got 200 years of examples of how that's a fundamentally flawed system. But, the private sector has a duty to their employees, a duty to their community, and a duty to the country. And you can't just maximize profits and hack up companies and send production overseas because that increases margins by 30%. I mean, another area is the private equity stuff. We basically got a set of laws that incents private equity to chop up American businesses. I mean, these guys, this is like a chop shop with people in $5,000 suits, just chopping up the economy for parts. And it's great for them, but it's screwing everybody else.
That was the nature of the 80s. Right, the corporate takeover. I mean, that's why KB Toys.
In the 90s, and then
Mitt Romney actually took out KB Toys in that exact manner. They took over KB Toys and then chopped it up and dissolved it.
Yeah. I mean, Romney and Bain was part of that, but it really got bad after 2008 when we drove interest rates down into the dirt, and capital got incredibly cheap, and it was easy to get a loan and to buy a company and then chop it up and sell the parts. And so during that period of cheap money, that's when concentration in the American economy just was turbocharged. And now we're looking at it coming out of the pandemic, and it's like, God, what happened to competition in semiconductors and computers and wireless, right? When I first got out of the Army, I went into the wireless industry. There was like 20 wireless providers across the country.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
Now there are 3.
Yeah.
Right. And we were knocking I was at T-Mobile in the early days, and, we were like 1 quarter away from AT&T crushing us back in the day. And we were scrambling. And if AT&T did something in Minneapolis, we responded the next day. Yeah. Right. It was brutal competition. But that's the reason why the American wireless sector just passed Europe, passed the world, all the cool stuff, all the cool innovation was happening here. But now consolidated,
Right.
Apple came in.
If I may, in using cell phones, and you have to be, our age to remember this, but before you could take your phone number with you, people were like really stuck with their carrier because they're like, damn it, man, this is my phone number. Like, and so there was lack of competition because you're like, damn it, I like started with this carrier. Now everybody has this number. I don't want to like go through all my contacts, all this. It was really hard you used to have to manually transfer your contacts and everything. Then once you were able to take your phone number with you, owned that phone number, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, now you had people fighting again for competition. So that's when it's like, we'll give you the free phone. Just come on over to our plan. Whereas before they're like, you're stuck with me, man. Like, you're not going anywhere.
Not going anywhere.
Yeah. But it was that regulation or that essentially changed, which is no, you can take your phone number with you. And there was like one or two other things that I remember happening that all of a sudden drove down prices of cell phones.
Yeah. It was the interoperability, which is another key thing, right? And you take that example, so it got brutally competitive, and then sprinkle in cheap capital, and you have all of this M&A activity, and now you're just down to three. Effectively, there's a couple of tiny little guys here and there, but that's it. And so the prices are roughly the same, and they're kind of, there's some wink, wink, nudge, nudge stuff going on. But that interoperability, like, why can't you take your photo catalog from Facebook and move it somewhere else? You can't.
Interesting, yeah.
Right? Because you put up, Meta puts up these walls so that you can't switch. And interoperability, particularly in the digital economy, is just absolutely essential to creating competition. But you've got all of these efforts to make it impossible to move from one platform to the other. And so you're stuck in a platform, and then, Meta's famous for anybody that looks like they may be competitor to them. They use that cheap capital and they bought them. They bought WhatsApp, they bought Instagram, and now these guys are controlling what an ungodly share of Americans see every day. And they're trying to drive ad revenue.
When you talk about just at the end there, when you said, look, people are controlling what people can see, this was one of the big defining pieces of the last presidential campaign with, President Trump really articulating, like, we need to ensure that people cannot control, like, we need a free and real media system. Right. And he's been hypercritical of legacy media quite aggressively. I've had my own run-ins with it as of late because, for whatever reason. But the point is that that's a big concern for a lot of people. Other people don't have a problem with it. What do you see as the future of media in the United States? Do you think that, like, we're doing a good enough job to, have guardrails around the media systems? Because essentially what I'm getting at is the media corporations got purchased by people with different political leanings. And so now you have a group of people on the left that are, funded by the billionaires on the left. And then you have a group of people on the right that are funded by the billionaires on the right. And then you have like Joe Rogan, who's just, funded by himself. And like, that's essentially the big problem, which is, look, if you're turning on Fox News, you know exactly what you get. If you turn on MSNBC, you know exactly what you're going to get. And these are people that are all saying, like, no, I'm telling you the truth. And it's like, nobody actually trusts any of them. And, we fund media organizations and journalists and whatnot through our tax dollars, which is amazing as well. So, like, what do we do with that?
We do a little bit, and one of the classes I taught at Boise State was on technology policy, and you look at TVs and radio stations, or TV systems and radio stations. So we've got 220 markets in the U.S., and each of those has, the small ones may have 10, the big ones may have 30 television stations. So we made this decision, and same thing on radio, we made this decision back in the 20s and the 30s to say, no, we're not going to let you consolidate. And you can't own a radio station in every single market across the U.S. We're going to limit your ownership to basically 1/3. And so you used policy to make sure that nobody could concentrate the media industry.
Sure.
It was great, right? Now it's got
I don't know. I wasn't there. I'm sure it was great, but
and we're
I understand the concept,
but we're still living through that. And so but we never did that for the internet. You can do whatever you want for the internet. There's no rules on how much you can consolidate or companies you can buy or anything else. So you've got this legacy media that was has this 1930s perspective on the design. you've got digital media, but now you've got really cool stuff like what you're doing. I mean, podcasting is sort of breaking through that. And so you get local voices, you break out of the, sort of the old model here, the digital model here,
Right.
and you've just got this explosion of new creative content, and this is great, right? This is what they should be doing. Just make sure you don't get bought by CBS.
Yeah.
Okay?
I was going to say the real key with all of that is, interestingly enough, somebody sent me a clip with Matthew McConaughey. He's in his, whiskey wisdom and his like suave hair and everything. And he's talking about, he's like, Americans need to take back the airwaves. And it's like, yeah, but people are trying. It's just really, really hard, right? But I believe in it, right? Like I spend all day, every day attempting to talk to people that are relevant in Idaho and share those conversations. That's all I do. And I think that's the only way we move forward, in my opinion. But does the federal government have a place in attempting to address things that are supposed to be factually based, but people are more rapidly accusing them of being sensationalized or partisan?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or is it just like, no, let the consumer decide?
Yeah. And this is a super hard one, because you've got First Amendment rights. You've got, particularly high bar around political speech and what can be said that's considered political speech. And then you've got, when is it okay for people to just outright lie? I will say, there's really interesting stuff happening in social media, because social media has had this law called Section 230, which basically says, I'm X, I'm Facebook, Twitter, whatever it may be. Sorry, Twitter X. But I'm any of these social media platforms. I can't be held responsible for what shows up on my platform
because I'm the table. I'm not the guy putting things on the table. Yeah. If you're upset about something on the table, you got to talk to that guy who put it there.
Yeah.
Because I'm just the table.
Exactly. And you finally had a case about a year ago where a kid saw some stuff in one of the platforms. The algorithm fed it to the kid. The kid committed suicide. And the platform was saying, hey, it wasn't us. But the judge rightly said, no, it's your algorithm that sent that to this teenage kid that pushed them over the edge. You are accountable for that. And this is a really exciting area. And I hope we make some progress on this, because we've got to hold these platforms accountable for the crap. And now in the age of AI, I love the Sasquatch videos. Those are hilarious. But
dude, they're so good.
I know.
So good.
I mean, but that's got to be labeled, right? And everybody knows. But right. I mean, what are the rules on this stuff? So we've got to hold these platforms to a higher standard as they become the way that more and more Americans find their news and their information.
I was talking to somebody who went to an education conference in San Antonio. Literally, the conference was like yesterday or the day before, and a Instagram rep was there, and this is a large conference, and the Instagram rep was saying like, hey, we're really excited because we've now partnered with these schools. And then people were like, wait, what are you talking about? So I guess schools they were telling Instagram like, look, we have kids that come to school. They're getting bullied online by like these burner accounts. We think the burner accounts are other kids at our school, and like we report them to you and like nothing happens. So Instagram's like, hey, I have an idea. Why don't we partner with these schools and give them like more robust reporting mechanisms and blah, 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 blah. And initially you're like, oh, that's great. So they'll be like more responsive. No, what's happening is Instagram provided a platform that's not safe. Okay. It's not safe for the 15, 16-year-old. Bad things happen to this kid on this platform. And the kid goes to school and the kid's distraught and really upset because it's a bad platform. It does not bring out the best and whatever. And then Instagram's like, I know. That should be the school's responsibility. Yeah. Let's empower them to do our job, because we're just I don't have any and I feel like this is more and more of what's happening, not just in social media and stuff, but it kind of like across the country, which is like, I know, let's empower the American citizen in a system that's totally rigged against them. Yeah. Let's empower these people. You are in charge of your own destiny. Yeah. And here you go. Work for us. We're going to get you to work for us for free because they're not paying the school to do the monitoring. They're not paying the school to like do this reporting. Yeah. The school is just going to do it now for them when, you know, you're just in a bad system in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a great example of, you know, again, calling bullshit on this stuff. It's like, no, we're not doing this. And there's not even sort of the basic, you know, sort of the minimum community standards to say, ooh, this is a bad idea. We're gonna ask an under-resourced school to pick up even more work.
Oh my gosh! Add that to the cursive requirement.
Yeah, I mean, it's just and this is the kind of stuff I think where Congress isn't holding social media companies accountable. Social media companies are making more money than they know what to do with, and that's being used to make sure that Congress doesn't hold social media companies accountable. Now, the good news is, and this has happened, started with Trump, Biden continue it, and then Trump is picking it back up again. We are engaged in these antitrust lawsuits against Google, against Meta, you know, for some of the bad practices out there. It's not a policy solution, but it's at least going out there to break them up so they don't have these monopolies over the critical digital platforms. So I think, you know, Trump's doing good work on that. I think he's doing good work going after China. You know, getting the border under control, absolutely. You know, Biden really pushed forward on some of these things, you know, particularly from an antitrust and an anti-monopoly standpoint, that I think helped get the country going in the right way. But man, we still have such a long ways to go.
Yeah, we do. You are running for U.S. Senate. That election is in 2026, correct?
November 2026, 491 days from
491 days.
I'm running as an independent.
So you don't have to worry about the primary.
No primary.
And you would be taking Senator Risch's spot, correct?
Correct.
Well, man, good luck to you. There's a lot that's going on with the United States. And at the very least, having you come out and bring out these ideas are beautiful things that we can, you know, have this conversation about, right? No matter, it's like, I talk to a lot of people running for a lot of different positions, and every time it's like, listen, God bless you for coming out here and talking about the priorities that you have, because at the very least, even if it comes to pass that you're not successful, you bring things to the table. And we now have that on the table, and we have to address it, right? And if enough people agree with you, then you come up with some awesome solutions. And
yeah, no, I appreciate that, Matt. It's you know, we thought about this a long time, really reflected on it. It's an incredibly hard thing to do, particularly running as an independent, but it's winnable. And I just go back to some ways why I served in the Army, right? I mean, it's to support and defend the Constitution. And I think we've just got to get back to that. And we can do it, right? We have that flexibility. We can send an independent to Washington, D.C., and, you know, we can crack the system in D.C. so that we get back to an America that worked for everybody.
Todd Achilles, thank you for coming in, sir. Good luck with your
Matt.
campaign.
Appreciate the time.